Hi, welcome to Humanistic Psychology here at the University of West Georgia. So first things first, yes, I managed to get a haircut. And you may be wondering, well, where in the midst of the corona apocalypse did you manage to get a haircut? Well, actually, I managed to get a haircut in the middle of our kitchen floor last night. My wife gave me this haircut, so props to her for getting the hair out of my eyes. Much appreciated. At any rate, let's reconnect with where we were in the last video. Actually, this video is the third in a series where we're exploring Abraham Maslow, and more specifically his work, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. So, where were we? We were about halfway through chapter 2, and we ended off with a kind of riddle that's woven into Maslow's way of thinking about personality and also motivation, and the riddle went something like this. Well, if all of our motivations ultimately tend towards something like self-actualization, then why do the moments where we feel like we're self-actualizing seem so few and far between? Why do they seem relatively rare if the fact of the matter is that all of our motivations ultimately pull us toward that? And Maslow's way of talking about that is with respect to the Jonah Complex, which is going to be the main theme of this video. So the Jonah Complex, the treatment of which starts on page 34 of The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. So what is the Jonah Complex? Well, maybe one way into it would be to talk about the name, the Jonah Complex. The name Jonah, of course, refers to the biblical Jonah, the book of Jonah in the Bible. And most people remember Jonah as, well, isn't that the guy that got swallowed by the whale or the big fish, depending upon the biblical translation you're working with? And yeah, Jonah is the guy that got swallowed by the, let's say, whale. So, but that's not really the reason why the Jonah Complex is called the Jonah Complex. What you have to remember is the earlier part of the biblical story, like how Jonah ended up getting swallowed by the whale, and the way in which he ended up getting swallowed by the whale went something like this, that Jonah was commanded by God to make a prophecy about the destruction of Nineveh, which was the capital of ancient Assyria in the Bible. And Jonah's response to this commandment by God was to turn in the exact opposite direction, do a 180, and run as fast as he could away from making that prophecy. And he went on a long circuitous journey, and that's along the way, he ended up getting swallowed by a whale for 3 days, and then he got, I guess, expelled from the whale and so on. Eventually, he found his way back to Nineveh and did indeed make the prophecy. But the critical point is the turning away from God in the biblical story, and that's why Maslow picks the phrase Jonah Complex to describe his answer to that riddle that we glossed earlier. So the Jonah Complex is it describes the way that we actively avoid or turn away, a little bit like Jonah in the Bible, from our greater destiny, from our greater talents, from our greater growth. It's not just an accident, you see, that these moments of self-actualization or these moments of peak experience are so rare within our lives, at least the lives of most of us. And the reason why is because we're actively avoiding them. We're actively avoiding them. So the first thing to understand about the Jonah Complex, to get a handle on it, is that it's a way of describing how we actively avoid self-actualization, actively avoid things like peak or plateau experiences. So it's no accident that they're relatively rare. So following along with your notes a little bit, a fear of our inner greatness, an evasion of our growth and fulfilling our best talents in this life. And I put a little quote from Marianne Williamson. Wait a minute, where have you heard that name recently? Oh yeah, she was one of the candidates for the Democratic Party's candidacy for president not too long ago. It's the same Marianne Williamson, although this quote from her is a couple decades old already, or at least a couple decades. So she writes in a poem, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure," which I think is a fairly profound statement, because, you know, most of us, when we think about what we're really afraid of in this world, would probably say, well, at some level, we're afraid that we're not good enough, we're not talented enough, we're not constructed well enough to meet the demands of life in some kind of fruitful, harmonious way, that we are basically inadequate to the challenge of life is part of what scares us. And what she's saying is, and what Maslow is also saying, is that, yeah, all that stuff is scary for sure, but what's even scarier is the exact opposite of that. The thing that really freaks us out is the exact opposite, that we may at some level be powerful beings, and laying claim to that power is something that terrifies most of us. And that's part of what the Jonah Complex is about. So an evasion of our better destiny, a fear of what we glimpse about ourselves in our highest moments, like when you have a peak experience, when you see deeply into the structure of who and what you really are as a human being, and you glimpse, when you do that, something like a deeply luminous potential that is woven into the fabric of your being. Well, one of the natural reactions to that is to recoil from it. Yes, it's a wonderful thing to have that as part and parcel of our human birthright, but it's also a deeply terrifying thing at the same time. So there's what he's describing is a pretty deep ambivalence about how we are bearers of light in addition to bearers of darkness. So let's see. Okay, I put a couple quotes, I guess a couple quotes in your notes to try to get this across. So, oh God, it is a fearful thing to see the human soul take wing. So that's Byron, the famous Lord Byron, the poet. So the point is, it's very easy to be ambivalent about greatness. The greatness within ourselves, but also the greatness insofar as we perceive it in others. Because when we perceive it in others, in a way, there's a kind of implicit invitation to begin perceiving it in ourselves, because we're able to perceive in others what in some way, perhaps a very nascent way, but a way nonetheless, something that resides within ourselves. So it's very easy to be ambivalent about greatness in self or others. So exceptionally beautiful people, great creators, great geniuses, people that are just too damn lucky, it seems like, very saintly people, and so on. People that seem to embody in some way the desirable or the good more than we're comfortable with, and ultimately the reason why we're not comfortable with it is because we're not comfortable with it in ourselves. I think one place to see this is in how we tend to react to famous celebrities who seem to embody these qualities. Like a lot of celebrities, when you look at celebrities, really a lot of the time they usually embody any number of desirable qualities. First of all, most celebrities are, in a physical way, very attractive people. Second of all, they tend to be very rich. Third of all, they tend to be very popular and have a lot of attention and adulation heaped upon them. And the fact that we tend to put celebrities down, and if you don't believe that we tend to put celebrities down, what you ought to do is, next time you're at the grocery mart, I realize that may be a while in the midst of the corona panic, but the next time you're in the supermarket, check out at the cashier, they have these sort of gossip, what are they, tabloids or kind of semi-newspapers or yellow journalism, I don't know what they are. But when you're waiting there at the checkout at the grocery store, notice like the kinds of stories that appear on these rags. Now, I've been observing this for decades, and to me, it's a great confirmation of this insight about our ambivalence, about people that seem to embody the qualities that we would actually desire for ourselves. Things like being incredibly physically attractive, incredibly popular, the focus of attention, incredibly rich, and so on and so forth. For instance, for a long time, Tom Cruise, I think, was the center of this kind of ambivalence. Like, there were a lot of stories in these newspapers about Tom Cruise, and they're basically about putting him down. Just to be blunt about it, these stories are mostly about putting him down. Well, what were they putting Tom Cruise down about? Well, for a while they were talking about how he's secretly gay. And then for a while they were talking about how he's a Scientologist. So it's all about how he's a gay Scientologist. Now here's the reality of Tom Cruise. Can we get real here for a second? For a long time, I don't know if this is still true, but for a long time, Tom Cruise was the highest paid actor on the face of the planet. His average yearly intake was $75 million every single year. His current estimated net worth, I think, is a little bit over $500 million. So Tom Cruise, let's see, Tom Cruise. So he's obviously very wealthy. He's obviously very good looking. He's obviously has a tremendous latitude for creative and artistic expression in the form of acting, most obviously. Let's see, what else? He's been involved with some of the world's most attractive women, I would say, in the world in the last 30 years or so. So this is the kind of person that we're eager to put down, is the point, right? So Tom Cruise, think about Tom Cruise. I mean, do you think Tom Cruise is worried about whether you regard him as a gay Scientologist? Do you think he stays up at night worrying and fretting and ruminating about whether you're inclined to judge him negatively as a gay Scientologist? See, I think here's how Tom Cruise actually thinks. Tom Cruise probably thanks God every single day and night, assuming there's a God in Scientology. I don't know much about Scientology. I think he thanks God that he was born Tom Cruise and not you and not me either. I think that's the reality of it. I think that Tom Cruise probably is in love with his life, like deeply enjoying the latitude of power and creative expression and being the center of attention and being famous for so many decades and all of that kind of stuff. So why is it that we're so quick to put that down? I bet at some level, the reality is that you and I wouldn't mind having those things. You and I wouldn't mind too much being fabulously wealthy, fabulously physically attractive. Well, whether you think he's talented or not, I think he's a good actor personally, and so on, and having that sort of that kind of life. So why are we putting down the kind of life that at some level we ourselves would actually want? See, that's the essential Jonah Complex question. It's because we have a real deep ambivalence about these sorts of things is the answer, and that we actively run in the exact opposite direction because we're actually afraid of life's highest possibilities. Okay, so we often try to diminish greatness in others, even in ourselves, as in the fear of success, self-sabotage. So the Jonah Complex goes a long way to providing a template for understanding these kinds of things. Like, why is it we sabotage our success so damn often? And when you study psychology for a while, you gain an appreciation for how common that actually is. And it's actually very common, probably much more common than it might seem at first if you haven't been delving into psychology for a while. That we are our own worst enemies, and it's a horrific thing to discover that although your enemies in this life can do nasty things to you and can interfere with your life and interfere with your desires in various ways, that's really nothing. It's nothing compared to how we ourselves sabotage our lives and interfere with our desires and get in our own way. So the question, the obvious question, following along with your notes a bit, is what drives these kinds of Jonah complexes? And there are several layers of explanation for this. So the first layer, I'll do them in the same order as they appear in your notes. So fear of the sense of responsibility that often attends recognizing our own greatness, talents, potentials, etc. It's kind of a little bit like Stan Lee in Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. So earlier I quoted Byron, now we're quoting Spider-Man. I don't know if that's a degeneration or an elevation in the quality of this lecture, but at any rate, with great power, including laying claim to the power that's inherent in your being, comes great responsibility. So, and most of us feel responsibility as a kind of weight on our shoulders, that it's not necessarily a pleasant sensation to feel a greater sense of responsibility rather than a lesser sense of responsibility. So insofar as recognizing our talents, our better destinies, our powers, our greatness entails a kind of responsibility, we have a kind of motivation to run in the exact opposite direction. Why? Because most of us aren't particularly attracted to carrying the burden of a greater sense of responsibility. Like if you sense something really deep and powerful and luminous about your being, all of a sudden you're responsible for whatever it is you do with that perception. So if you look into it and see it deeply and unflinchingly and try to embody it the best you can, then you're responsible for that. On the other hand, if you get freaked out and scared and run in the exact opposite direction like Jonah did, then you're responsible for that. If you glimpse something like that about your being and you try to narcotize yourself in one way or another, either literally by way of alcohol and drugs or narcotizing yourself by way of popular entertainment, commodity culture, then you're responsible for that. So no matter how you slice it, there's a certain amount of responsibility that goes along with recognizing who and what you are in your deepest possibilities. And so part of what motivates the Jonah Complex is because most of us don't like the sensation of carrying greater weight, are motivated to move in the exact opposite direction. So that's part of it. So second sort of explanation for this Jonah Complex, fear that living an extraordinary, let me restart that. Fear that an extraordinary life would be out of the ordinary. Well, actually, that's what the word extraordinary means. Extraordinary, like out of the ordinary or beyond the ordinary. So a fear that living a life that is definitely beyond the ordinary would not be acceptable to other people, hence not acceptable to others. But then again, I say in your notes, what's the real value of such acceptance? So think of it this way, like, what this is about is a fear that other people might reject us if we were to glimpse something deep and powerful about our being and start to make it real, start to live toward it, start to manifest it in our lives. The fear is that other people would not be able to understand us. And by other people, I mean most specifically probably our friends and loved ones. That's where the fear really comes alive in us. It's not so much that, well, random strangers wouldn't be able to understand us. I think that most of us realize that a lot of the time random strangers aren't going to understand us irrespective of what we do. But the real fear is that the people we care about and that we interact with, basically friends, loved ones, girlfriend, boyfriend, I don't know what you got in your life, polymorphously perverse, cybernetically engineered lover, bot, something like that, whatever you got going on in your love life, that those people would, it's 21st century, you try to be sort of equitable to everyone, that those people wouldn't be able to understand you. And if they're not able to understand you, if you live toward what is deep and powerful and luminous in your being, they might reject you. So really, ultimately, it's a fear of rejection that we're worrying about. But to put some weight on the other side of the scale, because that fear is so primitive and so deeply ingrained for most of us, like go through this little thought experiment for a second. Okay, so if the price, let's limit it to your friends, okay? So if your friends are your friends, and the price of that friendship that they demand of you is that you not live toward what is deep and powerful and luminous in your being, you can well ask the question, are those people really your friends at all? Because if the price of that friendship is that you stay small and unfulfilled as the unique and distinct human being you are, well, actually, isn't that what your enemies would want for you? That you stay small and weak and relatively unfulfilled in your being. I mean, like what greater curse could your enemies have for you than that? So if the price of your friends, having your friends and maintaining that friendship is doing the same thing that your enemies would want, you can wonder whether your friends are really your friends at all, at least in a deep sense. And sure, they may be pleasant to be around and they may make your life feel a little bit more comfortable, but so what? So what? I mean, is that the point of your life? To be sort of comfortable till eventually you slip into the grave, and when you slip into the grave, oh, you'll be more comfortable yet in the grave. The grave will be such a wonderful place, nice, cool place for you to be buried with a velvet-lined casket. That'll be like so wonderful. Well, is that really the point of your life? Or on the other hand, is the point of your life not necessarily to be comforted by something like a false sense of friendship. See, I think your real friends, here's what your real friends would do. Like, your real friends are the people that really see you, not only in who and what you are in the present, but see you in terms of what you possibly could be in this life. And your real friends are willing to affirm that and help you move toward that. And if the people that you call your friends aren't doing that, you can question whether they're really your friends in any genuine sense at all. Same is true of your lovers. Like, if you think that the price of maintaining your love relationship is that you not move toward what you could possibly be in this world, well, maybe you don't have a lover, maybe you actually have a hater. And it's a case of mistaken identity. Well, I thought I had a lover, turned out I had a hater all along. Well, you know, if this is cutting a little too close to the bone right now, like, you can sort of defuse the shame bomb, because most of us have to go through that kind of experience. In fact, most of us, I would say, repeated times. Like, the person that we thought would fulfill us in our being, the person that we were attractive to in the mode of love, and all the vulnerability and strangeness that love entails, like, that person turned out to be the exact opposite. We thought we were entering into the gates of heaven. Turned out we were entering into the gates of hell in our love relationship. Well, you know, that's par for the course. You know, can I take your coat for you? You know, welcome to the human race. So you can not feel ashamed about that. Okay, so I guess the second, I don't know, I'm wound up. Maybe it's because I'm lighter, because I have less hair. I feel sort of liberated from that weight of hair, that shaggy dog hair I was carrying around. So fear that an extraordinary life would be out of the ordinary. So fear of rejection, that's part of what motivates the Jonah Complex. And I gave you a couple other examples. For instance, fear of seeming arrogant, self-centered, and so on. So there, and perhaps you've detected in this treatment of the Jonah Complex that, you know, if you're going to aspire to be the greatest version of yourself you can possibly be, then you have to make peace with the seeming arrogance of doing that. You're going to have to make peace with that. That if you're trying to be the best person you can possibly be, then you have to learn to let go of whatever neurotic aversion reaction you have to the idea of being the best you can be. Okay, so here's Maslow's take on our fear of arrogance. Like, the thing about self-actualization is that it's not about puffing your ego up, like puffing your ego up like a big balloon to some overinflated sense of disproportion or something like that. That self-actualization is actually about greater contact with reality. It's not about deviating from reality. It's about greater contact with reality. And the reality is that no matter how much you realize what is deep and powerful and interesting and poetic and musical about your being, it's always playing out against the backdrop of what is immeasurably greater than you. You get it? Like, there's a kind of intimacy or a kind of contact between the greatness that each of us embodies and the far greater greatness of the universe that we inhabit. So self-actualization is about realizing both of those at the same time. So it's not about just sort of, you know, sort of inflating your grandiosity to ridiculous proportions, like you feel like I feel so pumped up, like my ego is like so pumped up. I mean, it's incredible. The veins in my ego are distended. So it's not about that. It's about sorry about the cheesy Arnold impression, but it's about realizing that, yes, you are a deeply powerful, luminous being, but all of that plays out against the backdrop of things that are infinitely more than you. And it's about realizing both of those at the same time. So when you realize that who and what you are in your deepest recesses plays out with respect to the infinity that surrounds you, well, the thing is, that's an invitation to a kind of humility. Yes, you are great. At the same time, you are very small. That's the paradox of it. You're very large and very small at the same time. You're very finite, limited, and bounded, and at the same time, you are a participant in infinity. So realizing that paradox. Now, he gives an example of Aldous Huxley. Who's Aldous Huxley? Like, famous author, the famous author who was able to do that. So there's a sort of a evocative quote on page 38 about Aldous Huxley, if you want to look that up. And interesting, powerful human being and writer. Aldous Huxley, by the way, is one of the people that Maslow identifies as definitely being on the road to self-actualization. Okay, so that's what is it? I forgot what number I was on. So that's the second one. So here's the third one, and I think this is the most important one of all and the deepest one of all psychologically. Greatness often seems inherently dangerous. So it's not just about a fear of responsibility. It's not just about a fear of rejection. There's something inherently too much, something excessive about our deeper potentials as human beings, as about the people we are. And glimpsing it can very easily feel overwhelming to us. So the real freak out in this life, the real scary thing in this life is not just the various, dangers and perils and, the possibility we can die at any moment and that sort of thing. Our mortality is omnipresent, really, if we're honest about it. Maybe that's more obvious in the midst of the coronavirus thing. But the thing that really freaks us out is ourselves. And more specifically, the part of ourselves that takes the form of our deeper possibilities in this life. But that's part and parcel of what we are, right? That's integral to what we are. Our deepest potentials, the capacity to have a deep and luminous destiny in our lives, that's integral to what we are as beings that exist. So really what scares us is our existence itself, ultimately. So, and there's something overwhelming about our existence itself. So because of that, the Jonah Complex is partly about a fear of being overwhelmed, being immersed in too much intensity, losing control, annihilation, disintegration. Now here's the thing about that. At first this seems like, wow, that's like just a wild, unrealistic fantasy. No, that's not it at all. Because the fact of the matter is that if we're able, let's say it this way, when we're able to look into our deeper powers and our deeper talents and our deeper destiny and make it real, the fact of the matter is that that can annihilate us. Okay, so this is not an unrealistic fear. This is not just a weird fantasy, neurotic fantasy that we have. It's actually a very realistic fear, because when we live toward what is really deep and powerful within us, it has the potential to change who and what we are, to reorient our perceptual fields, to alter our relation to the world, to each other, to ourselves, to life itself, for that matter. So this fear of annihilation and being overwhelmed and being completely consumed, which motivates the Jonah Complex, I would say is a very realistic fear. Like, you may have to die as a small being in order to be what you could possibly be in this world. You may have to die moment by moment as a small being in order to become what you can become. Okay, so little quote from Viktor Frankl to sort of hopefully light this up a little bit. He goes, those who would shine, wonder if you would shine in this world. Wonder about your desire or your thirst in some important way, a non-trivial way, some deep and abiding way. Wonder about your desire to shine like a brilliant bolt of lightning arcing across the black velvet of the midnight sky, like that beautifully, that powerfully. Like, wonder about how you might shine. Those who would shine must learn to endure burning. Those who would shine must learn to endure burning. And in this case, of course, the burning would take the form of being able to look into that deep well of who and what you are in your highest, most interesting, most powerful moments. And to let that be the point on the compass that organizes the entire space within which you live, that gives you a sense of greater destiny and greater direction in your life. So, if the price of doing all of that is to learn to endure the kind of burning, the burning of responsibility, the burning of feeling a weight on your shoulders, the burning of feeling uncomprehending eyes upon us, right? Like people who don't understand what it is to be motivated by something like a greater destiny. The camera automatic shut off, went off. So let's see, what was I saying? Okay, so learning to endure the burning of responsibility, the burning of possibly courting other people's rejection, and more specifically courting the rejection of your current friends, your current lovers, whatever you got going on in your life, possibly your dogs and cats and all of that, because they don't understand why it is suddenly that you need to become a powerful being. Courting that sense of possible rejection, and then learning to endure the burning of entering into what seems fundamentally overwhelming about our being, what might seem to annihilate everything that has preceded it at any point in time, like how we've understood the world so far, our habitual habits that seem to provide a sense of direction and orientation to the world, a kind of annihilation of all of that. Those who would shine must learn to endure that kind of burning. So, since this video is already getting perhaps a little long, let's get to the last section, solving the Jonah Complex. Okay, so Maslow also gives some prescriptive suggestions at this point in the book for starting to move past the Jonah Complex. So one of them is to become aware, so it's a project of self-awareness. You getting it? Like you're getting past the automaticity of the Jonah Complex might necessitate your becoming a little bit more self-aware, expanding your consciousness, expanding the breadth and depth of your perceptual field so that you're able to perceive what you're doing and ultimately the kind of person that you are. And more specifically, he says, becoming aware of our countervaluing. So what's countervaluing? Well, countervaluing is how we tend to put down life's higher virtues and ultimately to put down or diminish or deflect our attention away from the deeper possibilities that we have as part and parcel of our being. So instead of doing that all the time, the prescription is to start to first become aware of it and then starting to enjoy the manifestations of talent and greatness and good fortune that other people have. Like maybe we don't have to hate Tom Cruise. And I almost feel a little funny saying that. Like if you love to hate Tom Cruise, well, I may be sort of goring your sacred cow at this point. Well, I just love to hate Tom Cruise. It's like, well, you know, maybe there's a deeper way of relating to people like Tom Cruise. He's just an example. There are many, many people that embody that sort of thing. You know, maybe I don't know, the Kardashians or someone, but celebrities like that. Maybe what these celebrities, a better orientation toward them would be to sort of celebrate them as manifestations of, in some way, desirable attributes that we ourselves would want and could possibly have. So Maslow describes this in terms of embracing the B values. Now, here's the thing about this point in the chapter. He doesn't actually tell you what the B values are, but because I care about you, the tuition-paying West Georgia student, I've actually gone through the book, later in the book, and culled out a list of them. So here's the list, and it appears in your notes. Here are what he identifies as the B values that you might start to embrace. Truth, goodness, beauty, wholeness, dichotomy transcendence. Okay, dichotomy transcendence, that might be a fancy phrase. In other words, that means getting past the tendency to divide the world into binary oppositions like right and wrong, good and bad, black and white, and so on. Getting past all of that, right? Learning to perceive the deeper and more subtle textures and gradations of color in the world. Aliveness, uniqueness, perfection, completion, justice, excuse me, simplicity, richness, effortlessness, playfulness. There's an odd one, playfulness. So part of getting past the Jonah Complex might mean reacquainting with yourself with the kind of playfulness that I'm guessing came easily to you, it does to most kids, as when you were a child, right? So reclaiming that perhaps lost part of yourself that is able to play with the world, play with the universe, play with your greater destiny, play with your talents, and so on. And finally, he lists self-sufficiency. So the final trick to this, the trick, of course, is about getting past, or at least starting to get past, our Jonah complex. It isn't about just denying that they're happening. You get it? Like, self-awareness means that you start to recognize how they're happening, that you start to own how they're happening, right? But at the same time, not being limited to that. So it's not about just a strict denial, well, I just deny that I'm caught in a Jonah complex. No, that's not the way out. That's the way into strengthening your Jonah complex. The way out of your Jonah complex is to live through your Jonah complex, not to sort of just try to sort of find a cheat. Like sometimes in gaming we call this cheat. Like you look up a cheat on the internet that sort of gets you to a further point in the game than really where you should be. So sometimes they call that spiritual bypassing, when you read about some great spiritual ideal, like the ideal of the bodhisattva in Buddhist thinking, which is a being a being that is at least very close to enlightenment, whose primary path through this world is to assist other beings in their path toward enlightenment. This is an idea from Mahayana Buddhism, right? So you hear about that, and all of a sudden you try to instantaneously promote yourself to the position of bodhisattva, and it's like, yeah, that's not the way to be a bodhisattva. That's a way to get lost in your attachments to the ideal of a bodhisattva from a Buddhist point of view. The way to become a bodhisattva is to live through all the stages that are necessary to get there. Similarly, the way to get past your Jonah complex is not to try to instantaneously promote yourself to a position of self-actualized being, let's say. The way to get through your Jonah complex is to live through it moment by moment by moment, with a greater cognizance and a greater awareness of how it is that it runs through you like a maddening current, carrying you to distant reaches, far, far, far from the ones that are your noblest and best destinies in this world. And then, at the same time, to realize that you don't necessarily have to be limited to that either. Okay, so that's that brings us to the end of chapter 2. So that's enough for this video. It's already long enough. So I'm hopefully going to make another video for you this afternoon on chapter 3 out of the Maslow book. Okay, until then, take care. Enjoy your Corona apocalypse. I keep telling you that. I hope you like my new haircut. When she gave me this haircut, I'll be honest with you, I thought I might come out of it looking like a topiary plant, but I thought she did a pretty good job. Okay, maybe not 100% professional, but not too bad. Anyhow, that's enough narcissism out of me. Take care. Have a good one.